Okay, welcome folks to today's interview, and today I'm very privileged to have with us Mr. Bob Andersen. Now, Bob has been involved in property development for a very long time, over 30 years, and he's in a conglomerate of people who control over $1 billion worth of property, and that's a super impressive stat. What's more impressive is Bob not only has a personal portfolio, but he's also doing it day to day, and he's also teaching people how to do it. So we're very lucky to have Bob with us today, and I want to welcome you to today's interview, Bob.
Thanks, Wes. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Now tell us, Bob, when you speak to people and they ask you what it is that you do, because I know you've got such a skill set, a range of skill set, what it is essentially that people need to know about you.
Well, Wes, primarily I'm in the property investment, property development area, but ultimately what I do is I use property development more as a vehicle for getting property investment at cost price, whether it's for myself, whether it's for investor clients. Property development is really a vehicle to accumulate the asset class of property, primarily residential property. So, yep, I'm a developer, but there's a reason for being a developer. And so, yeah, look, what I do, I'm a developer and I'm an investor.
Absolutely.
And my clients are all investors.
So a lot of people who kind of are thinking of getting into development, but maybe they've only done a couple of residential or maybe they haven't done any property and they're looking at getting into something on a small level. Is that something that you help people primarily and teach people how to do as well?
Yeah, certainly can. I've got an old saying, never pay retail, so myself, that's part of the reason I got involved in property development. Really, it was a vehicle for getting property investments at, well, not wholesale price, at absolute cost price. So people I meet, sometimes they haven't done a development at all. They may be investors with one or two investments of their own, and they see that potentially property development could be a great way of accumulating property investments fast and at cost. So with those people, yeah, look, I have a whole property development education program for those people who want to make the next step up from property investor to small property developer.
Wow. And I think there's a perception in the public that you've got to be, some sort of sophisticated, right up there and have done hundreds of deals before you can get into development. I mean, that's kind of, when I was going through that was the perception. And even if you look at, a lot of the property work out there in books and tapes and seminars, they always show you a progression where development is like the ultimate goal. But, you're saying that people can, with some knowledge, get into property development and make it work for them.
Yeah, no, they can. I think one of the first things that people need to do is to know why they want to get involved in property development.
So find a reason.
Yeah, and a good reason. I was talking to somebody last week who actually wanted to become involved in property development, so I put the question, as I always do, why do you want to do this? And they said, oh, look, I see property developers around, they've got big fancy houses, they drive red Ferraris, they often have young women hanging off their arms, and I said, well, that's not a really good, makes me sound very unsuccessful, because I've been married for 30 years, I don't drive a red Ferrari, and I haven't got the biggest house in the suburbs, so maybe I'm a failure as a property developer, but I think you have to go in there for the right reasons. And initially, as I said, it's a vehicle, it's a way of accumulating wealth, it's a way of accumulating property. So for those people, get the reason right first, and that's important. Having the right reasons, then the next question is, well, how do I get involved? And really, it's like everything, you have to be educated. You have to gain knowledge and increase your knowledge by leveraging off people with far greater knowledge. Absolutely,
and you've got to learn from people who are in the industry and doing it and are the real deal. I mean, there's a kind of lot of pretenders out there, and obviously I'm not going to name names or anything, but there are people out there who don't walk the talk, and there are people out there who don't actually do what they claim to do or say they do. And you have a record that just speaks for itself. With all the developments that you've done, resorts, hotels, government buildings, and all those kind of things that do that. So, how can people, identify who to learn from, and what kind of signs can they look for when looking for a mentor or looking for someone to actually leverage from?
I think they've got to do a little bit of their own due diligence, really. In my case, I am a real developer. I have a development company, Positive Property Strategies. We're involved in projects all the time, even currently, retirement villages, student accommodation projects, townhouses, units. We're always doing projects, and so yeah, I am a real property developer. Therefore, I have the ability to pass that knowledge on. We won't talk about people that may be trying to pass knowledge on that aren't property developers, but they're out there. But look, you've got to do your own due diligence on the subject.
So you're a developer first, and you're teaching people afterwards. You're not teaching people first as your core business, and then kind of trying to do property development on the side. And I think there's a big distinction, a big difference there.
Yeah, exactly. And I've developed this course. It took me quite a long time to develop it. It's basically the culmination of nearly 30 years of experience that I've put in my course, and I think that shows for anybody who really sees it.
Absolutely.
Credibility is everything, really.
Definitely, and I'd definitely like to chat a little bit about it later, because before our interview today, Bob's actually given me a little sneak peek of the course, and it's really exciting to see what he's put into it. It seems like a kind of a labour of love that he's actually put everything, or almost everything, into his brain that people can follow in a blueprint. But before we get to that, Bob, why don't you tell us maybe a couple of strategies that you recommend in today's volatile environment with regard to property development? How can someone get into property if they don't have $1 million in the bank? And how do you specifically help people? I think would be a really good addition to how people get in.
Yeah, well, look, knowledge is power. So the first thing people need to do is actually to educate themselves. In other words, make an investment in their future. Okay, and that requires spending some money. That's fine, because the greatest asset you have is yourself. So you need to invest in yourself. And there's sources of knowledge out there. When I originally sort of moved from, if you like, from a short period in real estate into property development, there's nothing out there. There's no books, there's no courses, there's no mentors. Did it the hard way. Made a few mistakes along the way, but there's so much out there these days. So increase that level of knowledge, and then ultimately, you have to make a first step. Some people keep accumulating knowledge, because they never make that step. So eventually, you have to make that move. Now, I always say, you don't have to have an IQ of 150. You don't have to be a multi-millionaire. You don't have to drive red Ferraris to get into property development. So, start small. You might be looking at something like a duplex, 2 townhouses together, or maybe a triplex of 3. You can get into that fairly readily. If you have no cash at all and you're building up this experience, you can look at more creative ways of getting into things. Joint ventures. Yep. I've done a lot of joint ventures, and there's so many different ways of structuring joint ventures. But you might look at a joint venture as a way of bringing in somebody with some money.
And you provide
your time and the knowledge that you're building. There's all sorts of things out there. There's things like using fancy stuff like call options and building equity into deals with a DA and this sort of thing. There are creative ways of getting in. That requires knowledge of that, and also, look, at the end of the day, you've got to do some work. So yeah, look, there are creative ways of getting in, but finance-wise too, on the smaller projects, some of the banks are coming back in and starting to lend retail finance again for 2s and 3 townhouses at higher LVRs. So there are some good opportunities to get in on the ground floor.
Absolutely. And so even if you don't have any money, you can still get your hands dirty and get some experience. Once you find some really good information that you can act on and find, I guess, a strategy that suits your personality, I guess, in a way, Bob. I mean, you were saying before that there's so many different things you could do, but some people like to do something that's more attuned to their personality. And their risk profile, I guess.
That's right. Some people are more entrepreneurial. I mean, I'm called all sorts of things. Basically, I'm a property developer, I'm a property investor. I'm also a deal maker, entrepreneur. So there's, as you said, things to suit people's personality. Some people are more creative than others. But look, there's a deal around the corner for everybody, to fit everybody.
absolutely. And I think even that mindset in itself, people are saying that there aren't deals out there. When someone like Bob is using day in, day out, there's always a deal.
Yeah, and look, and if you miss out on the deal of the year, the next one's only a week away.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow, that's powerful. So what are some of the, strategies that you give, Bob, to people who may have a little bit of cash lying around and maybe come to see you for, how can you help me, Bob? What kind of things do you say to those people? And maybe if you could give us a case study of how you've helped someone or given someone some advice or a strategy that has saved them some money or made them a lot of money.
Well, look, one of the first things to do before you set out looking for a site, the first thing you do is not look for a site. The first thing you do is have a look at the structure. You need to get your structure right, and that'll depend on what you're going to do, whether you're going to look for a site to flick, whether you're going to develop something and sell it, whether you're going to develop something and hold it. The structure will vary. Have a look at the finances. How are you going to fund this thing? You're going to use your own cash, you're going to use somebody else's, how it's going to be funded. But beyond that, before you start looking for a site, is to decide on the answers to those questions. Then we can have a look at what sort of deal fits the person.
So kind of do like a mini business plan.
Yeah, a mini business plan, yeah, exactly.
But don't spend too much time doing it, otherwise you'll probably lose it.
Some people come to me that they've already got a development site. They say, well, look, where do I go from here? Some people will say, look, I want to get into it. Where do I start? Okay, start by the knowledge. Once you've got the basic knowledge, then you can build upon that with, with a mentoring program or whatever's the next step. At the moment, I'm mentoring people that arrived with a deal on the table. They've already started. It's amazing, you see some people start it. It's scary sometimes. That actually some people are actually into their first project and quite lost.
Yeah.
And I pick up people at various stages. But as far as helping people into deals, you've met Ben Smith recently. Ben runs my portfolio turbocharger program. Ben started off basically as a mentoring student of mine. He arrived with a deal with a land subdivision.
Cool.
Potential joint venture for a 20-lot subdivision. And I was able to help him with that in terms of how to structure the deal, how to structure the joint venture, how to make the win-win with both parties. We sort of got the DA worked together on that. That was a great outcome. It was a great outcome for the landowner. It was a great outcome for Ben. And that was a 20-lot subdivision, which actually, the way it was financially structured, meant no money into the deal.
Wow. For
the actual developers, 20-lot subdivision, great outcome.
That's crazy.
I often use that one as an example because it's a very good deal of how you can actually creatively get into a deal and create all these.
So Ben obviously didn't know that off by his own bat, but he got into the game and he came and saw you because he knew you were actually you know what you're doing. And you were able to systematically look at all the different aspects of the deal and put something together that.
That's right.
That was a win.
That was a no money down deal, and it's history that Ben's developed a lot since then himself, of course. And these days he works with me within my business, but he's a developer in his own right as well.
Wow, powerful stuff. So if someone is sort of getting, you mentioned before, people were kind of just dive in and they don't really know what they're doing. And I was also reading in your book, which we'll talk about later. But what are some of the most common mistakes, Bob, that people make when they try and get in their first property development deal, and they just they don't know what they're doing, and they can lose potentially a lot of money? What are some of the things pitfalls that people can stay away from, based on your experience from the most common list of things?
Yeah. One thing that scares me is that often when people are starting out, is they don't know what they don't know. This is a dangerous thing. It's a good thing to know what you don't know, but when you don't know what you don't know, that is very dangerous. And sometimes I go into some of the large property forums, and you go in there and you see people coming up with the question, "I just bought a development site. What do I do next?" And they're asking other people out there who've never done a development for advice, and that's pretty scary stuff. So where can they go wrong? Well, due diligence is a big thing when you're looking for a site. Some people just launch out. They believe the real estate agent. Nothing wrong with real estate agents, but caveat or do your own due diligence.
Yeah.
Always say first thing, get a little team together, be it an architect, be it a town planner, and do your due diligence on the site. It might be a site without a development approval. Okay, what's the zoning? What's the likelihood of success on a development project? What's the yield? What can we get on it? 2 townhouses, 4 townhouses. Some people just launch out, buy a property without knowing that. It's quite scary.
Wow.
So, initially, the right sort of due diligence. Know the structure before you enter into a contract. Some people just launch into a contract saying their own personal name with the intent of developing and holding, and then they find out, well, I don't really want it in my own name after all, and it's an expensive business to try and take it out of, say, a personal name back into a trust or a company, whatever the structure is. So get these things in place early.
Absolutely. So, and that, I guess, all comes back to educating yourself and making sure that, I guess, you have at least a base level of education. I mean, I personally actually respect people who dive in and do stuff, but I think when there's there's things at stake, such as people's lives and people's families, and you've got to actually have that base foundation. And I think a great step, as we were talking about before, is going to Bob's site and getting his ebook. I've just spent the last few days reading it a few times, and it's an amazing resource. If nothing else, it's free, and it just teaches you everything, all the basics of property development. And so, Bob, for the people who want to know a little bit more about your book, how did that come to, how did the structure come? And I'm guessing over the years you've thought, how can I put together something that just teaches people the backbone of what I do? Well,
I wanted to get the basics out there because I was bumping into people all over the place. I was seeing.
And you're always getting the same questions, probably.
Well, the same questions, and as I said, you go onto some of the property forums and you see what people are really doing. So I thought, look, at least let's get some basic information out there about the development process, the sorts of developments you can do, what are the risks in basically development, what are the advantages of doing property development. So I put together that ebook. I think it's about a 41-page ebook, and it's free, so that helps as well.
That's pretty damn good.
It just gives people a bit of a feel for property development, what it's really about, what some of the advantages are, some of the risks are, and how you can get into deals. Obviously, how you can build a lot of wealth from it as well. So it's a good first base, if you like, to go to. And
absolutely. And one of the things I noticed about it is, people can start doing this in their spare time. I mean, they don't have to quit their job tomorrow and start going full-time property. They can actually learn and kind of do on their weekends, on their nights.
Yeah, look, I don't want to make property development sound like it's really easy, but it can be, with the right help, relatively easy. So, look, very often people that have done a course that I start to mentor have what I call a day job, and most of them are quite happy and quite comfortable to do, say, a 3 townhouse project. Let's say that's an entry level 2 or 3 townhouse project in their spare time while they're carrying out a full-time job. A lot of that, it comes from 2 areas. It comes from getting the right help while you're doing it, and then getting the right team of people around you. I obviously show people how to do that. And look, the thing is that once you start doing this, once you've done your first project, all of a sudden you say, how long's this been going on? You might do a 3 townhouse project. Let's say it's a moderately successful one. You might let's say you pull $70,000 profit per townhouse, which is fantastic. All of a sudden, at the end of, say, 12 or 18 months, it's $210,000 worth of profit there. But it could be cash profit if you sell them. It could be even better if you decide to keep some of the stock, because then you can hold it as a long-term investment. And of course, you don't pay tax unless you sell it, so you've got this accumulating asset that you can still harvest the equity of. So all of a sudden, the property development part-time thing is making 3 times or 4 times as much as the day job. So the temptation is, well, why don't I do it full time?
For sure.
Look, some do and some don't. Some people are happy to do a little project every couple of years, use that to build their property portfolio with a long-term goal. Whether that long-term goal is usually retiring early, change their lifestyle. Some people might develop 3 every 12, 18 months, 2 years. Sell 1, keep 2, sell 2, keep 1, use some of the extra cash, You know,
Wow.
lease the good car, go on some good holidays, and then the other.
I guess that's all part of their strategy, like the overall strategy that you were talking about before, putting down on paper what it is you want out of it. I mean, if you want to travel the world for the rest of your life and drive Ferraris, you're going to have to probably work a little bit harder than someone who just wants to, you know, be able to live and have their expenses paid by their investments. And so, I mean, on that note, I was reading one of the principles you were teaching, Bob, in the book, where you teach people how a property developer saves way more money than a retail investor for exactly the same deal. Give us a really quick summary of how that process works. I thought that was really fascinating.
Okay, let's take a typical, if you like, a typical little 3 townhouse project in my local city, bread and butter townhouse project. So let's say 3 or 4 townhouse projects. So just to make it easier to understand, let's break it down per townhouse. Okay, so we might be cutting a 3 townhouse project into 3 or a 4 townhouse project into 4. Look at it on a per townhouse basis. So a typical townhouse, let's say, might sell on completion for about $500,000. Normal bread and butter townhouse in one of the suburbs. Now that townhouse is probably going to cost somewhere between, you know, $400,000 to $425,000 to develop. Now, what I mean by that is all the costs are going to add up to, let's say, about $410,000, $415,000. Those costs include the land, professional fees of the consultants, the approval process, you know, the finance, and let's say the council fees and a few other bits and pieces. So what you've got on completion, you've got a property that's worth $500,000. Let's say it owes you, you know, $410,000, $415,000. What you can do, obviously, you can sell it at the end and you make a cash profit. You make a cash profit, it becomes income tax. That's great. You get a bundle of money, you pay your tax, and you move on. The other thing you can do, and you can even do a mix of the two, is to actually hold that property at the other end. Now, when you've developed it, let's say it's worth $500,000. Now, what's the bank going to lend you? Well, typically a bank on an investment would say, we'll lend 80% without mortgage insurance. So they're going to lend you $400,000 on a property that only owes you, let's say, $410,000. So really all you have to do is leave $10,000 into that deal. And the bank will, and the other $90,000 is profit. So the bank will lend you almost 100% of your costs. Now, if there's been even a smidgen of growth during that 12-month project, what was $500,000 at the beginning might be, say even say 5% growth. It'll be worth $525,000 by the time you complete it. So they lend 80% of that, and it's all your costs. So really all you're doing is you're leaving your development profit in as your deposit on the finance at the other end. So the bank is fully funding all your costs. So you can actually, the equity that you put in on the front of the project to do the development, you can now take out, leave your profit in, and hold that property. And really that's how you accumulate wealth. So all of a sudden you've got a property where you've got a 20% deposit, which is just your profit. You've got your equity back out, and you can go and do the same thing again. Wow!
So it allows you to, essentially replicate much more than if you tried to, do it on your own.
That's right. The normal way is to go and buy a $500,000 property for say $500,000. By the time you pay legals and stamp duty, it might owe you $520,000. It's worth $500,000. You got a little bit of negative equity almost. So you have to put in your $100,000 from somewhere. Often it's equity out of other projects, other properties, your home or whatever. But what you've got to do then, of course, you've got to wait for normal organic growth. You've got to wait for the market to increase in your properties in value. When they have, you refinance, you harvest your equity. So you're waiting on the market. The other way you take control of it, you actually create that equity immediately through property development. And that's the principle of it. You're actually, if you're like turbocharging, you're empowering it and you're creating that equity immediately at the end of the project.
Just from the structure and the concept. Wow, that's powerful, really powerful
stuff. So you accumulate a lot of property quicker. So what's that mean? Well, it might mean, if your goal is to retire, then you're retiring earlier.
Absolutely, wow.
Or you're retiring later with more money.
Definitely, and I think that's a distinction that people would do well to read about. Go back to Bob's book, check it out, and really do some numbers and for the same deal, as I said before, you can get up to 20, 30, probably possibly more percentage back on your money. and I think that's really powerful. So I want to talk about one more concept before we start telling people how they can find out more about you, Bob. And potentially for a more sophisticated investors watching this interview, maybe they got a little bit more money in the bank than someone who is just starting out, and they're wondering what they can do, how you could potentially help them. How do you help people with a higher net worth portfolio?
Well, a couple of ways. What we're talking about, I guess, my whole thing's property development. So it's really property investment, but my vehicle getting it faster is property development.
Yeah.
So really, you could almost break property development into two areas. You've got active property development, and then you've got passive property development. So active property development would be somebody who wants to learn the ropes, get in to developments, do their own developments. Okay, so they have to educate themselves. They need a hand on the way through, and they become property developers. They may stay small developers, or they may become big developers. That's active development. Now, the other way is if you like, is to get all the advantages of property development, but passively. So what that means, a passive developer, for instance, may be somebody who really doesn't want to get involved in the day-to-day operation of a development. They don't, could be, one example, we've actually got a brain surgeon client, okay, so he's just too busy operating on people's brains, okay, so that's near enough to a 7-day-a-week job, 14 hours a day.
Absolutely.
So he doesn't want to take his mind off that, thank goodness. What he wants to do, he wants to work his money.
Yeah, he wants to use property development as a vehicle.
Okay, exactly. So he uses that, his asset base and his cash flow to accumulate properties passively. So some of these high net worth individuals may come into a project with us. It could be a joint venture structure. We've got different structures where people can come in on a passive basis, and that way they can get the benefits of property development. Almost, well, not quite as cheaply as doing it yourself. It has to be, obviously, if someone's doing it for you. In case then there's a price to pay for that. But they can get eventually get into property way below retail price. And I was saying never pay retail. I can't pay retail for anything by nature. I just can't go out. I can't buy a car at retail. I can't buy a computer at retail. I've got to find a deal.
Definitely.
And there's people that like that, so they look for a deal with property. Yeah. This is another way of getting it.
And I'm really impressed by the fact that Bob takes that philosophy, and it's part of his mindset. It's part of what he believes. And one question I wanted to ask you, Bob, is about how you continue to cultivate your mindset, and what are some of the characteristics of the successful students that you have, mindset-wise. How are they thinking? How are they improving their knowledge? What kind of philosophies are they taking into their investments?
Well, I think first of all, most of the people that come on and want to do a project, as I said, I normally ask them why, what's their motivation, because if they don't have the right motivations, it's not going to work, and if things get a little bit tough, they'll give up. Okay, now, so having an end plan to it, then they become motivated to achieve that end plan. So once the motivation's there, that's the driving force behind it. So it makes them a lot more motivated and open to accumulating the knowledge that they need. And if there's little bushfires to put out along the way, then they're motivated, they've got the end goal in mind, and they'll deal with it, and we'll help them deal with it. So that's the right sort of mindset, is to go into it for the right reasons. Not just the red Ferrari. That can be a side product. The red Ferrari in their big house, that's a side product of it all, but it can't be the motivation.
Yeah.
So the other thing, in my course I've got a little area where I talk about the characteristics of a good development. Okay, in terms of being able to solve problems, being a lateral thinker. But as I said, you don't have to have an IQ of 140 or 150. Just an average intelligence, but a drive to want to learn and a drive to want to succeed. And a good work ethic. They're the basis that will get people there.
Absolutely, and I guess obviously when you're looking at working with someone, you need to make sure that those things are in place. Otherwise, they're going to waste your time, and it's not going to work. And obviously, time is money.
That's right. Well, if people move on beyond that, and I'm going to mentor somebody, they need to have all the basics in place in terms of that initial grounding in knowledge through the course or whatever, and then that area of motivation, because I wear a few hats, as you know. I've still got a property development business to run, and I can only take on a certain number of mentorees, if you like. And it's a matter of really choosing those who really want to move forward.
Absolutely. So on that note, Bob, I want to talk now about your mentoring programs. You actually offer a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about your upcoming product, which I've had the pleasure of previewing just a few minutes ago. But your mentoring program, people can actually leverage off your knowledge and have personal contact with you. Is that correct?
At the higher level,
yes.
Yeah, look, it's all about this whole education thing of being educated and building knowledge is about investing in yourself and then leveraging off other people's knowledge. You cannot, 5 or 10 years off your learning curve by accumulating the knowledge.
Well, you've had 30 plus years of experience, and people can get straight into that.
So, the way I work it, the initial thing that people need is they need to build their knowledge up of what property development is, what it's all about. Obviously the more technical aspects, just the processes of how it works, the sort of people that you integrate with. I've got a little saying that people say, well, what is property development? Well, what it is, it's about managing people and managing processes. So we've got the, if you like, the procedural part of property development. We've got the processes to go through, whether it's, the purchase of the site, the obtaining of the approval, the obtaining of finance, project management, the sales, whatever it is, the processes. You need to know those. The other thing is you're managing people on the way through. You've got various people you work with, an architect. The good thing is, property development, you actually subcontract areas of that. It's a bit like a renovator, you can go and renovate a house, you can just get a builder in to do everything, or you can go and then start organising one trade at a time. It's a bit like that with development. You get a really good architect in there who can then start to, if you like, organise some of the other consultants on your behalf, and you just control it. So depending how much you want to get in there. But this knowledge base is the initial thing. So that's what I call my property mastermind.
Yeah. And
property development
where can
course.
people go to actually get into that? Is there a site or?
Well, initially, if they go to the www.propertymastermind.com.au, that's my website where you can download the free ebook, and I think that's a good place to start.
Absolutely.
Once they've downloaded the free ebook, then they'll automatically be on my database. Once you're on there, look, when I have a launch, I've got a launch coming up shortly. I'll start to send out a few emails. Also, like to send out more content.
Just like this.
Like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And another good sort of good content, good meaty stuff, leading on to the course, and then the course will be available for a period of time. People, if they want it, can purchase the course simply over the internet. Through my website. It's very
Absolutely.
easy.
Now the course itself, Bob, is it's a monster of a course. I'll be honest. It's got I think 20 something CDs, 2 massive manual, 1 big manual and a support manual, 4 DVDs, a software program. Retails for like $400-500. Tell us about the actual structure of the course, Bob, and how it's going to help people take that next level from not knowing where to go to having a blueprint to get into property development.
West, I've built it in a sequential order, so I know what people need to know by now.
You were saying before, people don't know what they need to know. You know what they need to know.
I know what they need to know, even if they don't. So,
yes.
So what I've built in the Property Mastermind Property Developers course is all the knowledge, if you like, that they'll need to take the next step into property development. Now, you don't have to, as I tell you, I keep saying, you don't have to be brilliant. It's all sequential. People that have done it just say, look, it is really easy to follow. It's detailed, but it's not difficult to understand. So, look, I've got it's built upon lessons. I've got 41 lessons or 41 chapters of covering everything from beginning to end. And within those lessons, I refer to a support manual which accompanies the lessons. It has a 370-page support manual. It's full of things like checklists and documents and templates of
exactly the stuff you use in your business.
Yeah, look, these are copies out of lots of my projects and the things that I use every day.
That you paid probably tens of thousands, if not more,
that I've learnt the hard way
to develop.
Exactly.
As well.
Yep. And that's in the support manual. So you might come to an area in the lessons and say, refer to the feasibility template or refer to the due diligence template. You go to the support manual and there it is. So we've got the lessons, we've got the support manual, Now beyond that, I've actually recorded a set of 20 CDs, which is really the whole of the 41 lessons in audio. So if you like, you can put that onto an MP3 player, you can play it at the gym, you can play the CDs in the car. Because some people are more audio, they like to hear, some people like to read.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one can reinforce the other. As well as that, I've put in a 6-hour set of DVDs of a live workshop I did with some of our investors. It was a closed-door workshop, going through the whole development process, but even looking at different angles that aren't in the lessons. Lots of PowerPoints. I've got a complete PowerPoint, probably about 100 PowerPoint slides in there on a separate CD as well, where I go through a whole heap of things: creative finance, the whole due diligence process, lots of photos, 6-hour DVD set. Now, beyond that, something new is I've actually done a series of interviews lately with my insider group, if you like, my inner circle of consultants.
Which you probably pay a small fortune to consult to as well.
Yeah, they do all right. So it's me interviewing them. Okay, here's a change. So I've interviewed a property accountant, property lawyer, one of my builders, project marketer, commercial finance broker, town planner, interior designer, these sorts of people. So it's me interviewing them. That's in a set of 8 CDs.
And imagine, the experience you bring to know what questions to ask. You could put a newbie in front of these guys and they just wouldn't know what to ask.
No, it'd be a 30-second interview. So I've dragged out all the knowledge out of them, and that's valuable. Also, in my lessons folder, what I've plugged in the back of those is 3 case studies. So I've picked three deals that we've done, 3 projects we've done. Real life ones. A subdivision and 2 townhouse projects. We've absolutely pulled the deals apart, from how we came across the deals, the sort of due diligence that we did, how we contracted the deals, even down to the sort of terms and conditions in the contract, how the deal came together, how we financed them, how we got the approvals, how the project management side of it, how all that came together, the marketing, the sales out the back end, on 3 of those. There's no substitute for actually going inside real deals and see how that happens. I'm also looking at an early bird special. For those who get in an order early, I've done a series of called Under the Microscope. What I've done these are sites that we've looked at that were on the market for sale. Okay, and we've absolutely gone in and pulled all these apart and said, well, these are the things to look for in this particular deal. These are the things I liked about the site, the things I didn't like about the site, problems that could arise.
So it's almost as if someone was looking over your shoulder and accessing your brain.
Yeah, exactly. And the things that people come back to me often and say, I say, what's the hardest thing with getting into your first project? And people that are looking and getting into their first project say, to know a deal when I see one, if I see a site, how do I really know if it's a deal? So part of that is the due diligence analysis, and the other part is the pure number crunching. So this is my due diligence analysis of how I look at a deal and whether I bought it or I didn't.
In 30 years, you would have pretty much got it down to a fine art by now. Would it be fair to say?
It would be, yeah. And all of that due diligence stuff is in the course, all the templates that we use. So that's called Under the Microscope. There's 5. I've pulled out 5 of those that I've looked at in probably the last 6 months, with a full analysis of those. Probably an early bird special. There's something else I've put into the course. It comes to do with the number crunching. How you number crunch, or let's say the feasibility analysis, all that's in the course. I've got 4 chapters just about how to do feasibilities. But I've put a software program in there, not just a cheap little Excel that somebody's put together. I've seen a few of them around there, they're just full of holes. This is a proprietary software package which has been on the market for 20 years.
Well respected in the industry.
Yep. It's called Fee Study. The deal is called, it's Fee Study Lite. That's the program. It's an excellent program. The recommended retail price, in fact you can go on the internet anywhere, is $440, and it's great value at $440. It's all you'll ever need to do small development projects, bigger ones. Worth $440. I'm putting that into my course because I really want people to have a professional presentation when they put it before the bank or before a valuer, And also, it really makes the number crunching easy. I mean, who wants to work out interest in a deal the long way, you know? It's a great program. As I said, it's been around, constantly being redeveloped, been around for 20 years. I'm putting that in the course of this day.
Wow. Fantastic. So it sounds like, Bob, you've literally given the entire toolbox that anyone would need to get into, you know, property development, from point A to point Z. Everything they're going to need, the foundations they're going to set, and you know, we were talking before about information and education being the first step into getting in, you know, without getting burnt massively. And there's literally no better way to get in from someone who's done it for so long. And you know, I for one am excited about the release of this product, and I think it's going to help many people avoid the traps and the misconceptions of getting into property development. So I guess on that note, Bob, is there any parting words you want to say to you know, people who are watching the interview, a bit of sage advice or anything you want to impart on leaving?
On leaving? Other than, no matter what endeavour you want to get involved in, get a good grounding. Look, it doesn't matter whether it's property or outside property, there's just so much knowledge out there these days. Do the right due diligence, but don't be afraid to invest in yourself. The best asset you have is yourself, and invest in that, increase your knowledge. With knowledge comes confidence, and with confidence comes the strength, or the inner strength, if you like, to take that step, that first step. And from there, well, it's all over.
Absolutely. Beautiful. And on that note, so just really quickly, if you want to get a hold of Bob's free report, it's at www.propertymastermind.com.au. Highly recommend reading the free report if you're looking at getting into property development, or even if you're just looking at learning about the industry or taking another step in the right direction. You can read more about Bob's course from the links included in and around this interview, and I hope you've got something of value. Bob Andersen, thank you for talking to us. Hopefully we've really added some value to the viewers, and I appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure, West.
Cheers.
Cheers.